Welcome to Debut, a fusion of storytelling and play. If you don't know what Debut is, we hope you'll find out. Because you're missing all the fun. You're missing the play, and most of all, you're missing these amazing, accomplished storytellers who have agreed to tell a story for the first time for you. You are their first audience. Our motto is there's beauty in the beginning. And one of my esteemed pleasures is not only being the host, but to have these interview series and to work with these tellers, and fine tellers they are. Let me tell you about the teller I'm about to introduce. He's an Oklahoma Choctaw, an award-winning author and storyteller. His great-grandfather walked the Trail of Tears in 1835. He has spoken at the Library of Congress and presented his first performance at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., and maybe more since then. He's received a master's degree in English literature. He's written a number of books for middle school, young adult, and all over for all audiences. He's received the Talking Leaves Award, the Oracle Award from the National Storytelling Network, and so much more. That's what's on paper. Let me tell you a little bit about this storyteller. This storyteller is both generous as a storyteller because he is commanding on stage, but also generous about the art. When I was a high school storytelling teacher, it was not uncommon for him to call me up and just talk story, or we'd be at a conference or a convention, and my students would come home realizing there's a new direction in story and that this teller brought on some of that direction. I've told him before, and I'll just tell you now, that he's one of the tellers that I've seen walk from the spirit world to the real world and put them together, whether it's with the Choctaw Trail or so many more rich native tales. But he tells all kinds of stories. He's a good friend and colleague. Let me bring on Tim Tingle.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Or as we say in Choctaw, Yakoki.
Yakoki. Tim, it is such an honor to have you. I so appreciate you as a storyteller and a friend and colleague, and being here on Debut. Yakaki. Hopefully, I said that somewhat. Okay. I'm beginning Choctaw.
Yeah, right.
But I'm going to ask you a question, and feel free to answer it any way you want. What brought you to stories, or what brought you to the land of story?
Okay. Now, before I answer, many of the listeners will be educated people. And although very seldom do we have math majors in the storytelling world, we may have a few people who can do math, maybe on their iPhones or, and those people might be questioning the fact that my great-grandfather walked the Trail of Tears in 1830, and we're in 2021,
Okay,
doing
sure.
this fraction. Yeah. It was actually my great-great-great-grandfather. Okay.
Yes, it does say that.
Yeah, it was my great-great-great. And I am Oklahoma Choctaw, although I was raised and spent most of my life on the Texas Gulf Coast. And in telling you why, I'm answering your question of what brought me into story. My grandmother, Minnie Ochitama Good, lived on Strawberry Road in Pasadena, Texas. She was Choctaw, and she and my grandfather would invite the kids and their kids, so my aunts, uncles, mother, father, every weekend we could come over. We could come over Friday morning, spend all day Friday. If it was summertime, all day, and usually we would come over either Saturday, spend the night Saturday, and for the kids, if it was rainy or something, we would all sleep in the living room on the floor, bundled up, or if it was good weather, we would sleep out in the backyard and wrap our blankets around us and crawl into sleeping bags. And my Uncle Kenneth would come out in the backyard, and it was 500 acres. It was cattle, it was horses, it was 250 chickens and eggs everywhere, and a great vineyard. And I mean, it was wonderful. And Uncle Kenneth would sit on a big stump and he would tell us stories. You know, he would tell us what it was like in the Trail of Tears, and he would tell us about your great 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 grandfather. That would be John Carnes, and you know, he'd tell us these stories. And my grandmother always whispered. I never heard my grandmother speak, never. In all the years I knew her, I never heard her speak in a normal adult voice. It was always a whisper. And I remember somebody, maybe it was cousin Cindy, saying, how come Mama always talks so quiet? And he looked around, and the way he looked at the back door to make sure that no one was over his shoulder, and the way he leaned forward and he talked quieter, let us all know, oh, this is serious. And so we all kind of leaned together, and he told us about when she was 12 years old and a wagon pulled up in front of her house, and basically the men talked her parents into signing this document to get her into Indian boarding school, or they were going to lose their land in Oklahoma. We're going to lose their land. Well, her father read Choctaw, wrote in Choctaw, but he didn't read in English that good. But she was sent to a boarding school, and she cried and cried when they put her on the wagon and drove away. They said, you can come home once a month. Your parents can visit you anytime, all summer long, holidays, and it's a free boarding school, and you'll learn, you know. And she cried, and they threw a couple of weeks' worth of stuff in the back and a pillowcase, and off they drove. It was the last time she ever saw her parents, ever. Basically, the men were one of dozens of groups of people that would go all over Oklahoma, and basically they were kidnapping Indian children and selling them to the boarding schools. So she was never allowed to go home because they knew they would never see her again. They sold her to the boarding schools. And one thing at the boarding school, if you spoke a single word of your native language, even one word of your native language, you had to put your hands out on the desk, and the teacher would come along with one of those stout wooden rulers and beat on your hands until every knuckle bled of every finger for these little kids. And then if you bend a finger, it would crack the scab, so the pain would last more like weeks than days. So the native kids would always look around and then whisper. They would whisper their native language so they wouldn't be overheard. And she grew up for how many years with this as part of her life? So even though when she left the boarding school, she never spoke again, she just became so accustomed to whispering. Because if she said a single Choctaw phrase like yakoki or halito, hello, anything like that, the punishment was the same. So she whispered. Her whole life she whispered. And when my Uncle Kenneth told us this and told us some things that had happened on the Trail of Tears and how John Carnes, my great-great-great-grandfather, ended up having to carry the bones of his mother as the trail finished, he told us these things. And as I went through school, I remember, we didn't learn anything about what had happened to Native people, and, nothing. But then I knew when my son, surely they would tell the truth or much more detail about American history. I couldn't wait for him to get in the 5th grade, because that's when they studied American history, and I knew that my son would begin to learn, and I could share some of the stories with him. But when he came home with the textbook, and there was nothing, not a word about Native peoples, nowhere, certainly nothing about the Trail of Tears. And I remember talking to him, and I said, Jacob, there's so much more that's not in this book. And then I had the idea, and I volunteered to go talk to his class. So I went and I talked to Jacob's 5th grade class, and I told them some things. And I think for most storytellers, it's the same for most writers. You think in plots. you don't just think of tossing this fact out and that fact out. You think with a plot line, just like my Uncle Kenneth thought in a plot line. So I would kind of tell these anecdotes and stories, and I knew that since they're fifth grade, I couldn't get really bloody and, I would just tell the stories about the Trail of Tears. And I left out the part about how he had to carry the bones of his, but I would just tell about things and share things. And then she invited me back. And so I started going like once every couple of months and then one time she had another teacher who was on a break come in and listen to me talk to the kids. And the other teacher said, I think it was a librarian. And the librarian said, there are storytellers that go to schools and they make a living doing this. I said, I'm serious. I said, what's a storyteller? And she said, they're storytellers. They go to school. And then I started kind of, doing a little research on it. And I found out that at a library that there was actually a storytelling festival in Texas, at Denton, Texas. And I had never heard a storyteller before in my whole life. So Doc Moore and I drove all the way up to Denton, Texas to see what this was all about, to the Texas State Storytelling Festival. It was under this 3 tents, not just 1 tent, but 3 big tents. And the first storyteller we ever heard was Ray Hicks.
Oh, wow.
He was the first storyteller we ever heard.
And he didn't travel out too much.
No. And then, no, wait. Ray Hicks? No, it wasn't Ray. Ray was the first one I ever heard in Jonesboro. Gotcha. It was Jackie Torrance.
Oh, what a first.
Yeah, she was the first live storyteller I ever heard, Jackie Torrance. And Jackie Torrance and Bobby Norfolk and Elizabeth Ellis, and it was an incredible lineup, and I was just blown away. I thought, whoa, so there are storytellers. And the first thing I thought about when I got up in the intermission after I'd heard Jackie Torrance and Bobby Norfolk, as I walked out the tent during the intermission to get some coffee, I thought, okay, it's nice that they have a profession of storytellers. I can never do that. I can't do that. These people are too skilled in it. I can't do that, but I'll enjoy the rest of it anyway. And so I left the storytelling festival thinking, I'll never be able to do that, but at least I can do the best I can. So I started going around at schools and starting charging a small fee. And after a couple of years of doing that and getting days off from my regular job, which, I own the company, so I could do that on occasion, then I realized that if I had more time, I was getting a lot of invitations. So I sold the company and went into storytelling full time. And this was 1995, 1993. It was a long time ago. And storytelling just began to grow and grow and blossom. And one thing that in Texas they had very few of was Native American tellers.
Right.
And I knew some Choctaw stories, but Doc Moore understood that I needed to know more from the heartland because I had been to Oklahoma a few times. I knew some Choctaws there. I knew my grandmother. But Doc decided he had a van and he said, we're going to Mississippi. And I said, what? And he said, you know where the Choctaw homeland is? I said, yeah, it's central Mississippi. He said, okay, you don't have anything on your schedule next week. We're going. And so we piled things in and we took off to central Mississippi. And I met some Choctaws there that become lifelong friends before they died. And they let me tape record some of their memories. And that really boosted it. That's when I started singing our Choctaw National Anthem as I do stories. And I want to, if you don't mind.
Oh, the invite is right there, and the appreciation.
Sure. This is not a Choctaw drum. It's a Laguna drum. That's Kokopelli on it. But the song is our Choctaw National Anthem. And it has been for about a century. She long bish ho lito ba ma ish me ti pu la cha ha ya ishbi yokapa lashki. The first book ever published in the Choctaw language was an old Methodist hymn book. And on page 48 of that is Shalombish Holy Topama, which is Amazing Grace in Choctaw. And there have been, who knows, dozens of reprints of that book, adding new hymns, taking some out, but they make certain that that's always on page 48. So older Choctaws, for the longest time, if some old man came in, I've really been having a hard day today, I don't know what's going to happen, and someone would say, have you sung 48 yet? And they would say, well, you know what? I haven't. Maybe that'll help. And they'd kind of step away and quietly sing Amazing Grace in Choctaw, because every traditional Choctaw, Oklahoma Choctaw, will sing that at least once a day, just as a way, because it was sung on the Trail of Tears. And every Oklahoma Choctaw has ancestors that survived the Trail of Tears. That's how we made it to Oklahoma. So we sing it at least once a day, just to pay homage and always remember. Always remember. Okay, that's enough of an answer to your question. How did I get involved in storytelling?
That
There you
that
go.
is so powerful. It really is, and it shows that storytelling is well, it makes things visible, doesn't it? I know that
Yes.
when I read Vendavario's "Custard Died for Your Sins," he said that we don't want to be called the invisible race, and um, uh, you made Choctaw tradition visible in the last 10 minutes than I ever have on a sentence in a history book that said there was a Trail of Tears, within the
Thank
context
you.
of Native history. So thank you so much for that, Tim. And so you have come to find that story not only makes things visible, but you've been challenged every time in the sense of your story journey. Can you talk a little bit about how your journey has changed over those years?
Well, first off, the Von Deloria book that you just mentioned, as I look over my laptop, it's right there on my shelf. I can see it right there. I have
Well,
probably a dozen full shelves of 20 to 24 books of Native American fiction, nonfiction, just all kinds of things. And that does relate to your question, because as I began, first off, I never wrote stories down. I would work on them, and I've walked 5 miles a day. Now I didn't used to track my walking, but for the last like 650 days in a row, I've walked 5 miles a day. And so far today, I've walked 3.9 miles. So I've still got a little, but I'll make it. But anyway, as I walk, I go over stories, or one particular story. I'll work on one new story at a time, and I'll think about that story, and I'll try to picture the scenes, and then I'll imagine how it opens and how it starts, and I'll kind of start telling it to myself. And and then several years ago, maybe a decade ago, after I would do that for a while, I would write it down, handwrite it in a journal, and then go back and do a few revisions and read it over a few times, and then close it and then tell it. And the telling of it, it was never, even when I was writing it, it was never about memorizing what you wrote.
right.
Never about memorizing. I would try to break it down into kind of 5 scenes: an opening that pulls in, a close that not only closes the plot line, but hopefully the kind of close that can be said in a quiet voice in such a way that the audience will go, and there'll be silence. And then, whatever. But never did I aim. I've told Crossing Boat Chitto literally thousands of times. And you could put all those thousands together and you'd never find any two that were word for word the same. And oftentimes, like I've got a 45-minute version of Crossing Boat Chitto, or I've got a 12-minute version if I have to. I don't like the 12. I'd rather do kind of the 30-minute, but also the audience. If the audience is very responsive to humor, and if I have a story, and even tragic stories, I'll toss in a little bit of humor, and I'll try that early on in the story. And if there's not even a ripple of laughter, then I won't include. If people kind of enjoy the laughter, then I'll toss in a little bit more humor as the story progresses. Even the Trail of Tears, there are some humorous elements there. And one thing I learned that from one of the master storytellers, and it might have been David Holt. It was one of the old time storytellers. Was that humor is not. Oh, I learned this from Charlie Jones, who was my Choctaw teacher. That humor to Western culture, as he worded it, but he says nahulos, and it's not. Nahulo is the Choctaw word for white, but it's not a disrespectful way. It just means non-Choctaw people, a way of saying it that other Choctaws. Nahulos often think of humor as something that is off the cuff. It's over here,
Right.
and it's fine, and then you get back to reality. But to Choctaws, for centuries, the two most important elements of Choctaw life is the power of forgiveness. None of our stories ever make heroes out of the warriors and the winners of the war. Never. It's always the peacemakers. The power of forgiveness. Pushmataha, one of our most famous chiefs and generals, once said, "You cannot blame the people in front of you for mistakes their ancestors made."
Wow.
In other words, the Nahulos may have driven us on the Trail of Tears and passed out deliberately smallpox blankets, and thousands of people died, but you cannot blame the Nahulos in front of you today for that. You cannot do this. The power of forgiveness. And other than that, the number two most important thing in Choctaw culture is humor. Humor. Whether it's a State of the Nation address, whether it's humor. It's very important to the culture because humor opens the door to what you want the people to see. So you don't toss out tragedy and toss out fear and toss out blames. You use humor and you open the door, and that lets them step into the friendly atmosphere where you can discuss and teach.
And we see that in Salty Pie, the children's book that you wrote.
Yeah.
We see that, and I'm glad you said that because you have distinctive markers as a teller, and one of them is the way that you use humor, and humor is a way to heal and see, and the other thing that you said is that all storytellers kind of work from plot, and I say they work from episodes because plots can change over time within one sentence or a paragraph, and you really you've been in the land of walking 5 miles and talking story. You've shared with me that you have friends that you get together and talk story with. You find story within the written landscape. So that leads me to think just how much you explore story. I see story serves more than a function of just telling on a stage. And I think you see the power that story has. Do you mind speaking a little to that?
No, not at all. I think when you've been involved, as you and I have, with storytelling as long as we have, that it's not so, it's not merely about the performing art, that we step off stage, but we carry story with us wherever we are, whether it's the grocery store, whether it's the putting gas in your car, and whether we carry that with us. And when I see everyone sees the world differently. Every one of us sees a different thing when we're waiting in a grocery store line and we look at the people around us and we see the cashier and we see the fellow hauling in and putting up the bottles and we see, all those kind of things. we see it differently. And for myself, I imagine how this person got there. I imagine to myself what their background would be and how they reached this point. And when I see the way they relate to other people, and so much is revealed through what they say, through how they say it, through the little snippets of dialogue, I I can't unplug that, and I don't want to unplug that. It's always stepping out at the real world is like entering the world that's there for you to witness and see and learn from, whether it's the wind blowing the grass or whether it's someone pushing a baby cart or with a dog walking out in front of my house and how they relate to another barking dog, just all
But
kinds of
Tim,
things.
that's a practiced craft. Story
Yeah,
making in storytelling. We do a lot of privilege of storytelling and we say this is where it is, but we don't talk behind the scenes of what makes us look for story, respond in story, and watching the wind and watching the baby cart. I try to deliberately every day look and respond in story. I think it not only makes me a better
yeah.
storyteller, but a better person. And if I'm hearing you right, during a 5 minute walk or getting a new car, congratulations, by the way, or just meeting a stranger at the post office, you look for the stories that might happen.
Yeah, and I don't deliberately look for them. I don't think about that. This is the world I've lived in for so long. I live in the story world. And when I went, and I have a good friend from Ohio. Have you ever
That's a
been
good
there?
place. That's where I am.
Yeah. Chillicothe. You
You
know
have
where
two.
Chillicothe is?
Yes, I know where Chillicothe is.
Yeah,
And
Chillicothe is.
you have
Well,
two good friends in Ohio.
Bill
At
McKee
least.
lives in Chillicothe, and I met him. I was at the Atmore. It's a Creek Indian, Alabama Creek Indian Storytelling Festival, and it's actually going to be live next spring. So I'll be there for I've done it for about 10 years, but with COVID, it was unplugged, the live, and I did it on Zoom. But anyway, I was at the casino and I sat down and there were no other chairs. And so this fella comes up, "Can I sit down with you?" And I said, "Well, yeah, go ahead." And so I said, "Well, where are you from?" He said, "Oh, I'm from Ohio." Up. I said, "Whoa, what are you down in Atmore?" He said, "Well, I got a place in Pensacola, not too far from here." I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, I did a storytelling festival up in Ohio." And he said, "Where?" I said, "Chillicothe." And he said, "Chillicothe?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I've never met anybody not from Ohio that didn't even know how to say Chillicothe. They don't even know how to pronounce it." And I said, "Well, there's a storytelling festival up there. I've been there a couple of times, and I haven't been there in 10 years." And he said, "You won't believe this, but my brother-in-law runs that storytelling festival." I said, "Are you serious?" He said, "Yeah, he runs a storytelling festival." I said, "Well, why don't you next time you get on back there, or email him or something, or write him a letter and say, I met this amazing storyteller, Tim Tingle, and he wants to come back to the festival." And he said, "Well, I've never heard you tell a story." I said, "Yeah, but you've lied before. Go ahead and lie again." We were getting along. He said, "Okay." So in about 6 weeks, I got an email from the Chillicothe Storytelling Festival that wanted me to come back next year.
I love it.
And
I
I
love it.
said, "Yeah, I'll be glad to." And we agreed on things. And then I sent an email to Bill McKee and I said, "You won't believe that. Hey, thank you for getting me invited back to the festival." And he said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Thank you. I've been invited." He said, "I forgot to tell him. I didn't say a word to anybody about it." And that's true. That's how that happened.
Oh, that's hilarious.
I hadn't been there in a decade. I met a fellow whose kinfolk ran the festival, and
That
and
is
then I was invited back
hilarious.
after 10 years. So
You,
Bill started coming down here for heavy duty winters for a few months, and I would go up there for heavy duty summers, and we made a lot of friends in both places, and it was a lot of fun. And then COVID hit, and he came down for just a couple of months, and then COVID hit, and he ended up being here for 11 months.
wow.
And he just left about 10 days ago to
That's
get back
funny.
up there. Yeah,
I
and
think
when
I
he
called you when he was there, and you're like, I got another Ohio guy here.
another Ohio guy on the phone. Yeah, now what was the question? What I was supposed to be talking
Oh, I
about?
don't remember, but that's all right. I was immersed in the story. Actually, it was about that. It was about the connections that we make. And you said that you don't
Yeah,
look for the stories, but you are in the story world. And I would argue that you are open to that story world. And as storytellers,
yeah,
we need to move there. Also, you said that the imagination is extremely important, and I see the imagination as a doorway to play. So
Yeah,
you're
sure.
soon going to be on debut, and
You
what
know,
is
just so I'm
play?
very nervous about that. I'm very nervous.
Which is quite okay.
Okay.
I hear the humor in the Choctaw there,
I'll do the best I can.
which is all we ask, and we're so thankful
Achofa
for.
tuklo takchina ushtahlapi tuklo on takchina chakali pokoli.
I'm still working on the thank you one.
Yeah, well, that was just 1 to 10 in Choctaw. That's all it was. It wasn't anything complicated.
I love it, Tim. I love it.
I speak, people say, they'll hear me say Yakoke or Halito or Chima Chukma, and they'll say, look at me and say, you speak Choctaw? People in Oklahoma, you speak Choctaw? And they'll say, yeah, I speak a dialect. And they say, what? And I say, it's a dialect called the Gitba dialect, Gitba dialect. And they say, the Gitba dialect. So I say, yeah, I can kind of get by on it.
I love it. I
The
love it.
Gitba dialect. Okay, anyway.
You're already playing. So what does play mean to you in story, and how's it changed or if it's changed you as a storyteller? Taking risks, making mistakes, learning from play.
I learned my first experience as a storyteller was we used to buy musical albums for my mother. My dad was overseas all the time, worked for Brown and Root Pipelines. He spent 10 years in Venezuela, 10 years in Ghana, West Africa, 10 years on barges across the West Sea. The Red Sea. He would come home 3 months every other year. So it was my mother that pretty much raised us. And we used to buy her musical albums. And she loved music. She loved to listen to music. So that was her favorite Christmas or birthday gift. And her favorite musical was West Side Story. And I'll never forget, I got her the album West Side Story for Christmas. And when she opened it, she just started crying and she put it on. And the music to West Side Story is so cool.
Oh, I love
And
West Side.
then, yeah, yeah. And then I was a basketball player in junior college. In high school, it was all district in high school, blah, 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 blah. And so I got a scholarship to a little Cisco Junior College. I got a scholarship there. So I went there and I played a couple of years, and our backcourt, back before the three-point shot, our backcourt, myself and the other guy, we were guards, we averaged 52 points a game.
Wow.
This was before the three-point shot. And the remarkable thing about it is I averaged 10. The other guy, Larry Walker, led the nation in scoring 42 points. Okay? But so when I could jump, because I had to. I'm 5'8" and a half, and if you're going to play college basketball, and this was before any of the major colleges in the South or Texas were integrated. So we had, in our little junior college conference, we had 2 players that were on the U.S. Olympic team the next year in Mexico City.
Wow.
Because they were black and they were incredible talents, but the other colleges didn't take them.
Wow.
Anyway, they did a couple of years later. But so when I came back home and I was going to University of Houston for a semester. I read that the big theater in downtown Austin was doing West Side Story. So I thought, whoa, that was Mother's favorite. Mother, she lived a long way away. But so I went and auditioned, and I couldn't sing. I didn't know how to dance. What's that? I didn't know how to dance, but I could jump. And I saw if people spread their legs, kind of pointed their feet, and they called it a jetty, a jete. That's what they called it, a jete.
Okay.
So I learned kind of the jete, and I could spin around a little bit. And if a woman fell from a man's shoulders, I could run out and catch her before she hit the ground. So I passed the audition. I wasn't one of the jets that sings, but I was one of the sharks. And my favorite song in the whole thing was Officer Krupke.
Yeah, really?
Officer Krupke, on my knee, canola like a fellow with a social disease. Officer Krupke. It was great. And the fellow that played Officer Krupke was kind of this husky guy, and he was just incredible, really good. It was a great performance. Lyndon Johnson, I think, was governor of Texas then, I think, and Lady Bird Johnson actually came to one of the performances.
Wow.
It was sold out at the big Paramount Theater downtown Austin near the Capitol. So the next weekend, they moved the production that was supposed to start so we could do 3 more. It was great. It was fun, and I loved it. And then my son, we were living on Teresa Street, and the big loop that circled Austin and gets you kind of around, the big loop was being built right in back of our house. But Austin is a very liberal Texas city, and there were all kinds of protests over the environmental issues. So they stopped for 9 months, and they'd already poured the soft black asphalt, not the concrete of the freeway, okay? It was Mopac 1, it's called. So I taught my son how to walk on the freeway. You know, it was just a gentle slope, and if he fell down, it was nice and soft, and he could roll, and I could catch him, and he loved it. And then he got to be like 4.5, 5 years old, and they opened the freeway, Mopac Freeway, 4 lanes either side, just speeding like crazy to get around Austin. And one morning, like it was the morning after they opened it at sunrise, 7 o'clock in the morning, about 10 that morning, I heard this bang, 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 bang on my back door. And I opened the door, and there was Officer Krupke. Officer Krupke was there, and he had my son under his arm. And I said, Officer Krupke, what are you doing with my son? And he said, I'm not Officer Krupke to you. I'm the fellow that rescued your son from, this boy is your son? I said, yeah. And he said, he was out there running all over Mopac Freeway. There were cars dodging, honking their horns, and this little kid is running all around the freeway. And I pulled over, and luckily I was able to rescue him. And you've let your son play on it. I said, well, that's where he learned how to walk. It's not like I'm going to encourage him to do that, but he did learn. Take him and take care of him. He slammed the door, and I opened it. I said, thank you, Officer Krupke. He said, I'm not Officer Krupke. I said, you will be forever for me. And I shut the door. And that happened.
Oh, wow.
Officer Krupke. So if I had not bought that album for my mother for Christmas decades ago and saw her cry when she listened to West Side Story, if I had not met Officer Krupke, maybe my son wouldn't be alive. I don't know. Not that it makes total logic, but
we don't
stories to be based on logic, do they?
I see that whole story rich with invitation.
Yeah, like a lie detector test invitation. Okay. But no, that really happened. Bang, bang, bang. I opened the back door, and it was an exciting day in Austin because Mopac Freeway was finally opening, and there was Officer Krupke with my son under his arm.
That is
and I can imagine my
hilarious.
son just running back and forth across Mopac, and cars just honking and dodging. My little kid, he was 4.5.
Oh, my God. Okay. The transition I moved to play with that is telling it you can do it. It was the scariest thing in the world, but you can play with how you tell it. Would I be correct?
Yeah, if you add Officer Krupke, I'm down
really a square.
Because no one wants a kid who died on the freeway or something.
Deep inside, we're psychologically hit by a car. We're hit by a car. Hit by a car.
You know the song.
I do. I went to West Side Story because Miss Ohio was the hostess at Bob Evans where I worked, and I liked Miss Ohio. Didn't know anything about West Side Story, but the next week I attended is because I loved the play, and it was a good thing that Miss Ohio was there too. And I bought the soundtrack, I bought the album. I mean, I think all of us has a little bit of either a shark or a jet in us, right?
Absolutely.
Or an Officer Krupke, I only a square.
Yeah. I'm trying to see if I can find it. I don't know if I can find it here. I don't know. Search. Let's see. Okay. Did that come even close to answering your question?
No, but I had a lot of fun with it.
Didn't answer your question?
So Tim, all that said and done, with your nervousness toward debut, why do debut?
Oh, and here's something. Michael Sokoloff told me this. And after I finished with West Side Story, I auditioned for a modern dance company. It was on the National Touring Artists Program, the Michael Sokoloff Dance Ensemble.
Wow.
And he needed male dancers, and I could jump, and I had rhythm. And so he accepted me into the company. We had 3 hours we had a 2-hour class every day, 7 days a week, and then 3 hours of rehearsal. And that's where I really learned to perform. And Sokoloff said, if you go into a performance and you're extremely nervous and you don't even know if you're going to be able to you're super nervous, chances are that's going to be your best performance of the year.
Wow.
If you feel very confident and no problem, you've got this, it's going to look weak. It's not going to look inspired from the audience. That nervousness, with all the rehearsal and the practice and the energy you put into it, that nervousness becomes the fire that will drive you to deliver a dynamite performance. And I never forgot that. So when I go, if I'm at Jonesboro, wherever I am, and I'm sitting and I'm about to be introduced and I'm really nervous, I look around and I think, okay, this is going to go well. Just take a deep breath. And you can do this, Tim. And I'll walk up the steps, and then once you start the story, the nerves fires the adrenaline, and it comes out.
So, Tim, I never start a story in a rush. I allow
Yeah.
the nervousness become the energy that drives the fire. It's not a beginning speaker's dragon. It's that,
Yeah.
and I literally take three. A story for me is an invitation, so I look at the audience, and like you just said, I stand there and Lance Henson, who you probably know, a Cheyenne Native American storyteller,
Yes.
said
Yeah.
that stories are gifts. It's up to us to take them and receive them. And I keep that in mind. And I say in my head, I have a gift for you. I look at three areas of the audience. Will you take it? And I give an invitation, and I let that cement myself to give the gift as opposed to rush the story. And it sounds like you kind of center yourself that way with the nervousness as well.
Yeah, very much. And if I see a storyteller pop out on stage and right away start to hop around, it's not going to work, because the audience is kind of, quietness and generosity and welcome and an extended hand are the things that will pull them into your story world. And we're creating a world with our stories.
Right.
It's a different world, and we want the audience to be immersed within that world.
But it's an invitation. It's an invitation to
Absolutely.
come. The one that's nervous, that just starts with that nervousness, and this is a generalization, but I've seen it happen many times. It's more about them being ready as opposed to being together.
Yeah.
With the story.
Yeah.
And
right.
and play is about that. People think play is like constant movement and we'll do this, but sometimes it's just playing with centering yourself with a different invitation.
Right.
And you're a good teacher of that. You really are. And we're going to see you at debut on July 25th, 2:00 Eastern Daylight Time.
July 25th. Now, what day is that coming up?
That's a Sunday. You're like, I better check my schedule.
Yeah. No, I was looking to see if I could get Officer Krupke to play on my phone, but it's too complex.
We're going to have to find where he is and bring him on debut with you. You know?
Yeah. Oh, Lord.
You know,
surely he would remember. If that man is still alive, he would absolutely remember rescuing a little 4 or 5-year-old.
How would you forget?
The first, yeah. And then the fellow that is his daddy calls me Officer Krupke.
He's probably working on another musical with this as the main subject.
Yeah. If he's a storyteller, he's got one.
Yeah. Tim, you've said many things today, one of the things that you said was about the importance of the whisper. And I think one of the biggest honors that I ever received was um, the Yokut Tashi. And I think I've told you this once before. Um, they believe that the creatures of the ground will swallow them up if they tell stories, except in the winter months. And I would take my
Oh,
high school teenagers every month to the Yokut Tashi, and we would tell stories for them. Now, they weren't allowed to tell me stories, but in
mhm.
a whisper, Mary Tip, who was a ceremonial elder of two
Yeah.
tribes, would whisper to me, I'm not allowed to tell you this, but I want to tell you this. And I learned some of the best stories through those whispers.
Oh, yeah.
And I think you're whispering and shouting for us to honor tradition, to carry tradition, to keep humor in the imagination, and in many senses, rich play to drive us there, which for many reasons, I'm so glad to have you on debut.
Thank you. I'm very much honored. I certainly am.
Tim, I didn't tell you this, but I'm going to give you the last word.
You're going to give me the last word?
You're going to give us the last word.
Okay. All right. With American Indians, many people think that, we still have a primitive nature about us. And in reality, Choctaws had wooden houses, had the equivalent of school buildings long before that fella that I call Columbo stumbled upon whatever. But we have also carried with us from centuries ago some of the traditions. And one of the traditions are our sacred animals. And our sacred animal is not the white buffalo and not the wolf. Those would be other nations. But one of our sacred animals, just a second, I actually have a shell here, is to the Choctaws, one of our sacred animals has always been the turtle. And one reason the turtle is a sacred animal is the turtle pulls stories in and keeps the stories for the next group of people. So it's a very sacred animal to us. And another of the sacred animals is what we would refer to as the dog, just the regular household dog who will let you know if trouble is coming, will let you know if trouble is coming. And Choctaw elders have been saying for centuries that if you respect your dog and make sure your dog is fed before anyone else eats at the table, feed your dog first, that there will come a time when your life is in danger and your dog will be there to protect you. And one of the most sacred animals also is the panther, the black panther or the mountain lion. And the thinking is if you respect your elders, remember them, and your life is in danger, that the panther will be there to protect you. Either a live panther or the return of an elder to save your life. So we respect who we are today. We respect the people we are with and speaking to, and we certainly respect those who have gone before. Yakoke, blessings on you all. Thank you.
Hey, buddy, where are you going? Hey, over here is where debut is. Don't stretch. Come on. Right here. Yes, Tim Tingle. Come on. I'll show you. Come on. Let's go.